We will either find a way or we will make one. Let's get into it, shall we? In this game, we get to see a lot of fun things, so I won't delay it any longer. We start off with that strong e4. I get to play the e5 in return. My opponent starts off with f4, showing his aggressive nature, showing that he's not afraid to bring the fight to me right off the bat, right off the cuff. And so, of course, I got to reciprocate. I do the same thing. And I play that knight to f6. So instead of playing like the accepted variation where we would capture the pawn here, or playing the decline variation where we would push the pawn here, I instead immediately want to fight back, immediately try to take it back into waters that I am familiar with, to pull it out of his known territory and back into mine. So he captures the pawn. I capture, regaining that material, but also now I'm threatening potentially that queen check reinforced by that knight covering that g3 square that he has to watch out for. So he plays knight to f3, giving me time. Yes, he's fighting for the d4 and e5 squares here, but it gives me time to play other moves. So I try to take back the center, and again, trying to transpose it back into the Petrov lines, in which that I know so well, and he might have difficulty with, even though he's a king gambit player, obviously. Here, he plays the b4, and the individual that I'm playing against is extremely tactical, extremely aggressive. He would much rather fight tooth and nail and give up everything he has than potentially go for a draw. He is good like that. I think there was a trait of Bobby Fischer as well. But here I capture the pawn. He plays the c3, pushing me back. And of course, what we see right off the cuff is that now we have a backwards pawn here. Or sorry. Yeah, now we have a backwards pawn here. This pawn is going to have a harder time getting out. And in addition to that, he's going to bring this bishop here, which later I learned. I didn't think of that in the game. But immediately when he brought that bishop out, it was like a shock. And I was like, oh, wait, I can't castle. He's guarding f8. But I have a choice here, a tough choice. What do I do with this bishop? Because clearly he wants to launch this pawn up, creating this pawn chain where he's going to have that e5, d4, and c3 squares. And so my dark squared bishop is not going to have much play because of that. So I have to figure out something to do with it. And so I think that the best option for me here is to simply pull the bishop back so that I can maintain this diagonal and potentially weaken this d4 pawn coming up, so I can play that c5, supported by that knight c6, potentially even running like a queen to b6, or maybe queen to c7, maybe queen to e7, supporting that pawn that I plan to move to c5, right? Many different options I'm thinking here at the moment I see this pawn come up. Also, clearly, the creation of this backwards pawn here, where he's going to have a hard time getting it up. I pull the bishop back. He plays bishop out. Now, as we stated before, this is stopping me from castling, right? It's watching that f8 square so the king can't castle through it. I play pawn to c5, trying to reobtain my castling rights, while simultaneously I'm trying to create a hindrance for pushing that d4, or pushing that d4 pawn up here, because now the bishop is going to be pinning that king, or pinning that c3 pawn up against that king. So it temporarily weakens it, while simultaneously now I can run that knight out to c6 without impeding that c5 pawn, and if necessary, bring it back to e7 to block out that bishop so that now I can castle again. He plays bishop down check. It looks like he's just trying to get quick development so he can castle and potentially bring this rook into the fight on that now semi-open file that they love to use so much in the King's Gambit. Makes sense to me. I'll bring bishop up. I have an option here. I can bring the knight up, but I feel like if I bring the knight up, we start to block in our own pieces. I feel like if I bring the knight to c6, it's just going to get passive, and it's going to embolden his knight on f3, as well as that pawn to d4. So I play bishop to d7, forcing the issue, saying fight me now or get out of my turf. He pulls back. He pulls bishop back to d3. And there's a lot of moves that I can make here that I don't make, right? I don't make. So some of the stuff that I was thinking during the game was, if I pull this bishop back and he castles, then I'll be able to push this pawn forward for a c5 check, picking up that bishop on d3 if the king is, of course, sitting here on g1, right? But we don't play hope chess. We don't play hope chess. We don't hope that our opponent makes the wrong move. What I was thinking was that by pulling this bishop back, let's go ahead and make the move. By pulling this bishop back, as the computer says, it's terrible, right? Horrible. By pulling the bishop back, I'm thinking that I can start to intune his pieces by pushing forward to c4, and now my bishop will have this dark square diagonal guarding his castling position where his king would be, and then I'm going to simultaneously stop that d pawn from going up to d4, as well as, most importantly for me, right? Look where this knight's going to play. Where's this knight's going to go if that pawn gets pushed forward? If the c pawn goes to c5 and the bishop's sitting here on d3, which it wouldn't be, it would move. Potentially, the bishop would take here, pulling this knight up, right? They are pulling that pawn up. So now that pawn can help watch that d3 square with that pawn up, creating a blind here. With that being the case, the knight's out of the fight. He can't join and help his friends. And because of that, the rook's out of the fight. So effectively, in doing so, I would have eliminated 3 pieces, really 2 pieces from this fight. So I don't have to deal with them. In my opinion, that means I'm 2 pieces up now. I don't care if they're on the board. If you're not using them, they don't exist. So he, of course, sees it, right? And he plays this strong c4 move. And I think this was the most jolting move to me in the entire game, because immediately now I'm looking at a bishop I'm looking at a bad bishop here. Yes, it's blocking in his bishop as well, and I can start to create other problems for him, like trying to make sure that this knight and rook can't get out. But what it's doing to me is it's stopping that c pawn from moving forward, which I wanted it to do. And now we have a problem where that d pawn, that d5 pawn, can't be supported by another pawn. So I have an issue that I have to remedy. I played bishop up to e6 because I need to get this queen more scope. Same way we give the bishop scope, I need to give that queen more scope so she can help out, as well as I need to utilize these bishops. I need to utilize that bishop on that light square to create problems for him as well. Now, clearly, I can't take this c pawn without losing the defender for that knight. The moment that pawn moves, the knight falls. But it allows me the ability to strengthen my range of my queen, as well as my control over that light squared diagonal, and making it so that he has to start to respond, or he has to start to think about what I'm doing. So he can't just use his plan to run over me. He plays queen to c2, building this battery on this knight, and then potentially on my castle position down here on h8. I see it, I pull the knight back. And my thought is, if we look at this, right, if we bisect the board here, cutting the board from king side to queen side, what we'll notice is that on his king side, he only has 2 pieces, and this is where he's planning on castling. Right now, I have 3 pieces that are capable of jumping over there. I'm going to lose this knight. So I think I'm in pretty good shape, as well as I know that I can't let the king sit here, but I can also potentially bring that rook into the fight. He castles. I capture. The tactics begin here. Feel free to pause it here if you want to. I guess I should take it back, right? Feel free to pause it here if you want to and see if you can notice it. What happens next? So here we are. Knight takes. Rook takes. Boom. Pawn takes. And bishop up. So the reason that the bishop cannot take back here is because what occurs is I'll play this queen down for check. So the queen will now be threatening the king and the rook and the bishop if the bishop was sitting here on the c5, c4 square. And he's going to have a harder time dealing with it. So for sure at that point, he's going to drop that bishop because then the bishop would only have one defender, which is the queen, while I would have two attackers, which would be my queen sitting here on d4 and that bishop. So he would drop it. So it would look like this, right? He captures, queen comes down for that check. Here we are, 1, 2, 3. He has problems. The queen is the master of the double attack. And in this case, she's able to pull off a triple attack. So he's going to have big problems. So instead, what he does is that after I capture, he pulls bishop up. Now notice that the bishop's x-raying this rook over here on a5. So I potentially have a problem. I could still run that same queen check, but I decide against it. The reason being is that, yes, I get this double attack, but the problem that I was foreseeing in the game was potentially getting trapped down here, where I come, I play this check, he plays king over, I take this rook, and now my thought was that what happens if he pulls bishop back, and now he pulls rook over, right? So this was an issue that I was afraid of during the game. Didn't really want to play that route. So instead, there's obviously other options too here, but I decided to play simply knight out. Now I still get to keep the initiative. I still get to push my opponent around to a certain degree. And now we're starting to build this blockade of pawns. This is not a weakness here. This is a wall of muscle. I am using these pawns, these C pawns, soon to be these tripled C pawns. I am using them as a wall to cut my opponent's pieces out of the fight. His dark squared bishop can't get back into the fight. And I know you think the same about my dark squared bishop at the moment, but soon I'll remedy that by simply repositioning it either to d8 or to c7. So he captures, giving me the triple pawns, aka this wall. But one of the benefits, one of the redeeming factors of these triple pawns, by the way, don't ever do this. If you can avoid it, don't do it, right? Don't do it. Don't do it. But one of the redeeming factors of this is these C pawns are all helping me to restrict his play on the D file so that I can take it for myself. Now I can pull that rook over to b8 and run it to control this b file. I can pull this rook over to d8 and run it to control that d file or that road. I can use those rooks to control those roads straight into my opponent's camp, all aided by that pawn wall, that wall of muscle, that barrier, that blockade. So he sees it and he repositions his bishop onto a better diagonal, but that one's still being blocked off by his own pawn. So once I castle over here, his bishop is going to be staring at his pawn. And either way it goes, that dark squared bishop is either going to reposition here where it's going to be staring at its pawn and it's going to have to work to get it out. But remember, this D pawn practically can't move because of my control on the D file, my influence over it. Or he can try to keep it here, but I'm using my bishop essentially as a big pawn right now, where it's anchoring my c4 pawn in, and it's soon to be reinforced so it can move, but it's anchoring that pawn in. Now, I castle. He plays the knight out. He's looking for the development and also looking to attack that pawn is what I'm seeing. But I also see that once that knight comes over to a3, immediately what snaps into my mind is do not allow that knight to get back into the game. He chose to put it on the rim. Make sure it never re-enters this fight. Isolate that knight at all costs. He will not come back into this game. So I see that the knight can potentially come to c2. I see that the knight can come back to b1. And I know that he's going to have a hard time making it here to c5, as well as he's not going to make it to b5. It's just not going to happen. So the question is how can I cut that knight out of the play? as well as cut his remaining pieces out of the fight. Yes, this rook's going to get into the fight. I can't do anything about that, but I can stop the dark squared bishop, meaning I can make mine strong. I can stop the knight, meaning that my influence over the light squares are going to be even better because I have that light squared bishop and he doesn't. So I play queen up. Now the queen isn't babysitting here, which it kind of looks like, but the queen is defending all those pawns while simultaneously allowing me to get more influence onto this D file, more influence onto this B file, and now I can start to reposition that dark squared bishop to bring it back into this fight by simply moving that queen. He brings bishop up, anchoring that bishop to that pawn, seeing that that pawn's going to be a weakness. It was a backwards pawn. Now it's an isolated pawn, and it's going to have an impossible time moving forward because of all my strength, all my influence on this D file, thanks to those triple pawns that he gave me. I pull bishop back. I'm repositioning the bishop so that I can bring the rook into the fray and so that I can re-aim and build a double attack on that pawn. He brings the rook over. Now, I use my A rook to take that B file so that I can have this road leading into my opponent's camp. And now I can work from there. He plays D3. And when you first look at it, it looks like a trap. In all honesty, I stared at this for a while, trying to figure out what exactly he was attempting to do, wondering whether or not I was missing something. What happens is that, plain and simple, right? We look at it, capture, capture. Now, this queen looks like it's trapped. The queen can't come here because of the rook, can't come here, can't come back. It can't come here because of the knight. It clearly can't walk into its own pawns. It can't stay on this D file because the rook is here, right? So it takes away all of these spaces from this queen, all of these. But notice that the bishop and the queen are working together to aim at that A2 pawn. That's what happens. Take the pawn, get out of the trap that he had set, and steal another pawn on the other side of the board. So what just happened was I now have a pass pawn on this A file. His rooks are starting to play on this D file and on this E file. So I should be able to work off of this A file and this B file, as well as, obviously, I'm going to contest this D file. I'm not just going to let him have it here. He plays queen back. Even though I had those triple pawns and now I have those double isolated pawns as well as the isolated pawn, remember now that these are pass pawns, right? Don't sleep on that. Don't forget about that. Though they are isolated, they are pass pawns and they demand respect. So he pulls the queen back so that he doesn't allow me to trade that material, potentially making it easier to promote those pawns. I bring this rook in looking for a double attack. I know that the rook is attacking that bishop. I know that the rook is also attacking this knight, which is only protected by the queen, but now I have a double attack on this knight. And I need him to move this knight. Once that knight moves, he'll have a problem somewhere else. He decides to play knight over. So once the knight moves, notice now that he has severed the connection from the queen and the bishop. So now there's only one. Also, my queen's down here attacking that knight. So I overload the rook by playing bishop up. The bishop does a wonderful job of creating this double attack when it's attacking the rook as well as the knight. And once the rook moves, once the rook is gone, he loses the protection on that dark squared bishop. Rook moves over. Queen takes. Again, I'm trying to induce a queen trade so that I can go into a winning endgame here. Now I'm a piece up. Now I have the bishop pair. Now I have two pass pawns. I don't count this other one because it's behind the first one. but I have at least 2 pass pawns. It's going to make it a little bit harder to work with the C file because I can't get a rook behind it to support that pawn, to support that far pawn because of my own pawns blocking me. But if I give up the initial pawn, I can stick a rook behind the secondary pawn and I should be able to run it down the board. He plays queen back. Now, he's playing for this quick mate. I pull this bishop back, and because of that one bishop and his supporting forces, I should be solid. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 defenders that are capable of moving diagonal, whereas he only has straight line pieces. He's fighting with, well, the queen and the rook, where he's using the rook and the queen together to build a battery, which means it has to be in a straight line. Whereas this dark squared bishop is still sealed out of the fight because of its own pawn. Yes, my bishop has moved, so that pawn can walk forward now, but it's a lot harder for him because now my bishop is pinning his rook. So I believe, I know definitively that he knew exactly what he was doing. He did not drop that rook. He sacrificed that rook. But this was the desperado attack. We were both low on time, and he was throwing everything he had into this. Bishop takes. Pawn takes. Rook captures. It looks like mate. Almost. It looks like mate. It looks like potentially this rook's going to be forced to move, and maybe this bishop's going to be forced to move, revealing this checkmate. Rook comes down. Rook comes back. Capture. Again, it kind of looks like mate where that queen can play down. The problem is not only can the king play up, but more importantly, the bishop can build a blockade for that king, making a protective wall. That's what happens. Queen down check. Bishop back. Notice now that the pawn stops him from checking me. And he can't check me here because of that bishop that he hasn't yet captured. So, check. He has to keep this going. He throws more material at it, hoping that there's something here. And I don't blame him. There's not much time on the clock. Something bad might happen. We might drop material. So he play on. Check. Not even capturing the hanging material, both here and here. So now we start to solidify this position. I have enough to win this. I have 2 pass pawns at least. I have an extra rook. I have an extra bishop. I have 2 extra bishops. Here we go. Check. And that's it. That's it. It's in this moment that realization sets